The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its crystalline dome reflecting the light of 1,000 distant stars. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated sections, each more technologically advanced than the last. The Zephyrians floated in their energy bubbles, their translucent forms shimmering with bioluminescent patterns. The Krolix delegation towered above the rest, their metallic exoskeletons gleaming with embedded quantum processors. Even the diminutive Pixari commanded respect, with their miniature fusion reactors humming softly within their chest cavities. At the center of this magnificent assembly sat humanity's first and only representative, Ambassador Sarah Chen. Her simple black diplomatic suit looked almost primitive against the backdrop of advanced alien technology. No glowing implants, no energy fields, no cybernetic enhancements. Just a human being with a briefcase and a translator device that seemed laughably outdated compared to the telepathic communication networks used by most council members. High Chancellor Vorthak of the Hegemony Council called the session to order with a resonant tone that vibrated through every being present. His species, the Thornids, had ruled the galactic government for over 3 millennia, their authority unquestioned due to their mastery of dimensional warfare and reality manipulation technologies. "We gather today," Vorthak announced, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic authority, "to review the application of the species calling themselves humans for membership in our council. This marks the first time in 800 cycles that a pre-quantum civilization has requested inclusion in our ranks." A wave of what could only be described as amusement rippled through the chamber. The Veltar delegation produced their characteristic chittering sounds, while the gaseous Nephilim shifted their cloudy forms in patterns that indicated derision. Ambassador Chen remained seated, her expression neutral despite the obvious mockery surrounding her. Councillor Jektar of the Mechanical Collective leaned forward, his optical sensors focusing on the human representative. "Ambassador Chen, our preliminary scans of your species' technology suggest you have barely achieved fusion power and are still using chemical propulsion for space travel. Your weapons technology appears to be based on kinetic projectiles." The last phrase was delivered with such incredulity that several species began what passed for laughter in their respective cultures. Sarah stood slowly, activating her primitive translator. "That is correct, Counselor. We do indeed use kinetic weapons as one of our primary military technologies." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien amusement. The Zephyrians' energy fields pulsed with rapid, chaotic patterns. The Krolix delegates clattered their exoskeleton plates together in their version of laughter. Even the usually stoic Nexari allowed their crystalline forms to emit brief flashes of light indicating humor. "Kinetic weapons!" exclaimed General Morden of the Conquest Fleet, his battle-scarred carapace reflecting the chamber's lights. "Do you mean to tell us that your species still hurls primitive chunks of metal at enemies? We abandoned such barbaric methods over 50,000 years ago when we developed plasma disintegration fields." Ambassador Chen nodded calmly. "We call them bullets, General. And yes, we have found them quite effective in our conflicts." This admission triggered another wave of mirth. High Chancellor Vorthak raised one of his forearms for silence, though the gesture seemed more amused than authoritative. "Ambassador, surely you understand that kinetic weapons are utterly useless against modern defensive technologies. Our personal shields can deflect asteroid impacts. Our ship hulls are constructed from materials that exist in 16 dimensions simultaneously. What possible threat could your bullets pose to civilizations that have transcended the basic laws of physics?" Sarah reached into her briefcase and withdrew a small, unremarkable object. It appeared to be nothing more than a copper-colored cylinder with a pointed tip. She held it up for all to see. "This is a standard rifle cartridge used by our military forces. The projectile weighs approximately 10 grams and travels at roughly 800 meters per second when fired. By your standards, it represents the absolute pinnacle of primitive warfare technology." The laughter that followed was so intense that the chamber's atmospheric processors had to compensate for the various breathing patterns of 47 different species, all expressing mirth simultaneously. Several delegates actually had to activate emergency life support systems due to their inability to control their amusement. Councillor Zirion of the Psionic Dominion, whose mental powers could crush battleships with thought alone, projected his voice directly into every mind present. "Dear primitive human, Our children's toys are more dangerous than your most advanced weapons. A Zephyrian infant could generate enough energy to vaporize your entire planet. The Mechanical Collective's basic maintenance drones carry weapons that could sterilize solar systems. What you hold in your hand is not a weapon. It is a curiosity that belongs in a museum of ancient barbarism. Ambassador Chen placed the cartridge carefully on the speaker's podium. I understand your skepticism, and I appreciate your patience in hearing our application. However, I believe there may be some fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of human warfare that deserve clarification. Oh, please do enlighten us, chortled Admiral Kesran of the Star Destroyer fleet, her biomechanical tentacles writhing with amusement. Tell us how your species of ground-bound primitives plans to contribute to a civilization that has mastered faster-than-light travel, temporal manipulation, and reality restructuring. What great military insights can you offer to races that have fought wars across multiple galaxies? The human ambassador straightened her shoulders and looked around the vast chamber, making eye contact with as many delegates as possible, despite the enormous diversity of ocular arrangements present. The insight we offer is simple, though perhaps not immediately obvious to civilizations that have grown accustomed to overwhelming technological superiority. We offer the understanding that in warfare, the most advanced technology does not always guarantee victory. Sometimes the most primitive solution is also the most effective. This statement caused a temporary pause in the laughter, not because it was taken seriously, but because it was so absurd that many delegates needed time to process its implications. High Chancellor Vorthak leaned back in his gravity-defying throne. Ambassador Chen, are you seriously suggesting that your primitive projectile weapons could pose a threat to our advanced civilizations? That somehow your species' crude understanding of kinetic force could overcome technologies that manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe itself? Sarah Chen smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It was the expression that somehow managed to be both respectful and quietly confident. I am suggesting exactly that, Chancellor, and I believe recent events in the Outer Rim territories may provide some context for why our application deserves more serious consideration than it has received thus far. The mention of the Outer Rim territories caused an immediate shift in the chamber's atmosphere. What had been open mockery moments before transformed into something closer to uncomfortable silence. Several delegates exchanged glances through whatever sensory apparatus their species possessed, and the ambient lighting seemed to dim as various bioluminescent beings unconsciously reduced their output. High Chancellor Vorthak's forearms tensed noticeably. The Outer Rim situation is classified at the highest levels of galactic security, Ambassador. How does a primitive species that has barely achieved interstellar travel possess knowledge of ongoing military operations? Sarah Chen maintained her calm demeanor, though observers skilled in reading human expressions might have noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. Because, Chancellor, 3 human vessels were present in the Kepler 442 system when the incident occurred. We witnessed the engagement firsthand. General Mordun's battle-scarred carapace clicked ominously as he shifted forward. Impossible. The Kepler 442 system was under complete quarantine. No unauthorized vessels were permitted within 50 light-years of the combat zone. Our sensor networks would have detected any primitive human craft long before they entered the restricted area. The human ambassador reached into her briefcase again, this time withdrawing a small data storage device that looked even more primitive than her translator. Its metal construction and visible circuit board seemed almost comically outdated compared to the quantum data storage systems used by the Council. Members, I have sensor recordings from all 3 human vessels, Sarah announced. The data includes detailed scans of the engagement, complete tactical analyses, and full-spectrum recordings of the weapons discharge patterns used by both sides during the conflict. Councillor Jektar's optical sensors whirred as they focused intently on the data device. Your primitive sensors would be incapable of penetrating our electromagnetic countermeasures, let alone recording useful data during a high-intensity engagement involving reality manipulation weapons. That's where you would be wrong, Sarah replied quietly. Our sensors are indeed primitive by your standards. They rely on basic electromagnetic spectrum analysis, gravitational wave detection, and simple optical recording devices. However, these primitive systems have one significant advantage over your advanced technology. The chamber waited in expectant silence, Even the most arrogant delegates found themselves curious about where this line of reasoning might lead. "They're invisible to your countermeasures," Sarah continued. "Your defensive systems are designed to counter quantum entanglement sensors, psionic detection networks, and dimensional scanning arrays. They completely ignore simple radio telescopes and optical cameras because no advanced civilization has used such primitive technology for millennia. In essence, our technological backwardness made us perfect intelligence gatherers." Admiral Kesseran's tentacles stopped writhing as she processed this information. "You're claiming that your ships conducted espionage operations against the combined might of the Galactic Defense Fleet? 3 primitive vessels somehow observed our most classified military engagement without detection?" "Not claiming," Sarah corrected, stating, "Would you like to review the data?" High Chancellor Vorthak extended one of his manipulator appendages, and the primitive data device floated across the chamber through a localized gravity field. Within moments, the device's contents were being processed through the Council's most advanced analysis systems. The central display screen materialized in the chamber's center, showing a 3-dimensional representation of the Kepler 442 system. What the delegates saw caused immediate alarm throughout the gathering. The recorded data showed 27 Galactic Defense Fleet vessels, including 3 flagship dreadnoughts, engaged in combat against what appeared to be an enemy they couldn't see. "This is impossible," breathed Counselor Zerion, his psionic ability struggling to process the implications. "The sensor logs show our fleet firing full-power antimatter salvos, reality disruption beams, and temporal displacement warheads at empty space." Sarah nodded grimly. "That's correct. Your advanced sensors, which rely on quantum entanglement and dimensional scanning, were unable to detect an enemy that existed in normal 3-dimensional space. Meanwhile, our primitive optical sensors clearly recorded the entire engagement. The display shifted to show the human perspective of the battle. Through simple optical recording, the enemy vessels became clearly visible. They were sleek, dark ships that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Most disturbing of all, they appeared to be using kinetic weapons against the Galactic Fleet. The enemy," Sarah continued, "appeared to be using technology similar to our own: chemical propulsion, kinetic projectiles, and basic electromagnetic systems. While your ships fired weapons that could theoretically destroy planets, their weapons consisted of what appeared to be magnetically accelerated metal projectiles." The chamber watched in horrified fascination as the recording showed Galactic dreadnoughts, ships capable of withstanding the explosion of small stars, being systematically destroyed by what looked like oversized bullets. The enemy projectiles passed through defensive shields as if they didn't exist, punched through hull armor that existed in multiple dimensions, and caused catastrophic internal damage with each impact. General Morden's voice carried a note of disbelief. "How is this possible? Our shields are generated using quantum field manipulation. They should be able to deflect any kinetic projectile regardless of velocity." "That's the problem," Sarah explained. "Your shields are designed to deflect quantum particles, exotic matter, and energy weapons that exist across multiple dimensional planes. They're incredibly sophisticated systems that can protect against the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, but they don't even register simple kinetic projectiles because no one has used such primitive weapons in 50,000 years." The recording continued, showing the systematic destruction of the Galactic Fleet. Ship after ship fell to the enemy's primitive weapons, their advanced defensive systems completely useless against basic kinetic attacks. The 3 human vessels, maintaining position at maximum sensor range, recorded every moment of the engagement. Counselor Zhektar's mechanical voice carried an unusual tremor. "The casualty reports from this engagement listed 47,000 military personnel as killed in action. 3 flagship dreadnoughts, 12 heavy cruisers, and 14 destroyer-class vessels were lost. We attributed the losses to an unknown enemy using advanced stealth technology and exotic weapons systems." "The enemy was using stealth technology," Sarah agreed, "but not exotic weapons. They were using the same kinetic projectiles that every species in this chamber abandoned millennia ago. The same primitive bullets that you've been laughing about for the past hour." The implications began settling over the chamber like a suffocating blanket. The most advanced military fleet in galactic history had been destroyed by weapons, technology that was considered obsolete before. Most of the represented civilizations had even achieved spaceflight. Admiral Kesseran's biomechanical tentacles trembled slightly. Are you suggesting that this unknown enemy specifically chose primitive weapons because they knew our defenses were designed to counter advanced technology? I'm suggesting, Sarah replied, that warfare is about more than having the most sophisticated weapons. It's about understanding your enemy's capabilities and finding ways to circumvent their advantages. Sometimes, the most effective weapon is the one your enemy isn't prepared to defend against. High Chancellor Vorthak's forearms gestured slowly as he processed the information. If this data is accurate, it means our entire defensive doctrine is fundamentally flawed. We've spent millennia developing countermeasures against advanced weapons while completely ignoring the possibility that an enemy might use primitive technology specifically because it would be overlooked. The chamber fell into a profound silence as the delegates contemplated the implications. The recording continued playing, showing the final moments of the engagement as the last galactic vessels were destroyed by simple kinetic weapons. The enemy fleet then disappeared into normal space using what appeared to be basic faster-than-light drives, leaving behind only debris and the 3 human observer ships. Sarah Chen looked around the chamber, noting the dramatic change in atmosphere from mocking laughter to grim contemplation. This is why humanity requests membership in the Galactic Council. Not because we possess advanced technology, but because we understand that in warfare, technological advancement can sometimes become a liability. We offer a perspective that has been forgotten by civilizations that have grown accustomed to overwhelming superiority. The silence that followed Ambassador Chen's statement stretched for several minutes. The representatives of 47 advanced civilizations found themselves grappling with a concept that challenged their fundamental understanding of military superiority. The idea that their technological advancement might represent a vulnerability rather than an asset was almost too radical to comprehend. Finally, Counselor Zerion of the Psionic Dominion broke the silence. His mental voice carried a tone that mixed curiosity with barely concealed concern. Ambassador Chen, are you implying that your species has encountered this enemy before? That humans have some previous experience fighting opponents who use primitive kinetic weapons? Sarah nodded slowly. We have extensive experience, Counselor. In fact, kinetic weapons have been the foundation of human warfare for over 600 years. We've developed tactics, strategies, and countermeasures based entirely around the effective use of projectile weapons. More importantly, we understand their limitations and how to overcome defensive measures designed to stop them. General Morden's carapace clicked with agitation. But surely your primitive technology would be even less effective against our defenses than the enemy weapons that destroyed our fleet. Your projectiles travel at a fraction of the velocity achieved by the attackers in the Kepler 442 system. That's true, Sarah admitted. Our current weapons technology is significantly less advanced than what was used against your fleet. However, the underlying principles remain the same. Kinetic weapons defeat energy shields by existing in normal spacetime, while the shields exist in quantum superposition. They penetrate advanced armor by concentrating force into a small area, rather than distributing energy across multiple dimensional planes. The human ambassador paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. But more importantly, we understand the tactical applications of kinetic weapons in ways that your enemy clearly did not. The engagement you witnessed was devastating, yes, but it was also inefficient. A properly planned kinetic assault using human tactical doctrine would have achieved the same result with 1/10 the ammunition expenditure. This statement caused another ripple of unease throughout the chamber. The idea that the devastating attack they had witnessed was somehow inefficient suggested a level of tactical sophistication that made the unknown enemy even more dangerous. Admiral Kesserin's tentacles writhed with nervous energy. You speak as if you could have conducted that engagement more effectively. Are you seriously claiming that your primitive human military could have performed better than an enemy that destroyed our most advanced fleet? Sarah Chen's expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes that made several delegates uncomfortable. I'm not claiming anything, Admiral. I'm stating a fact based on tactical analysis. The enemy in your recording made several critical errors that prolonged the engagement unnecessarily and exposed their vessels to potential counterattack. She gestured toward the display, which was now showing a frozen image of the battle's final moments. For example, they engaged your ships from within visual range, allowing your sensors to eventually adapt to their stealth technology. A human tactical doctrine would have maintained engagement distances of at least 50 kilometers, well beyond the effective range of your defensive systems, but close enough for accurate kinetic strikes. Counselor Jektar's optical sensors focused intently on the human representative. You've analyzed our defensive capabilities in detail. How long have your ships been observing our military operations? 3 years, Sarah replied without hesitation. Since the first human vessels achieved interstellar travel capability, we've conducted detailed reconnaissance of galactic military activities, trade routes, and defensive installations, all using primitive sensors that your advanced detection systems completely ignore. The admission sent a wave of shock through the chamber. The revelation that a primitive species had been conducting systematic espionage against the galaxy's most advanced civilizations for 3 years was almost as disturbing as the vulnerability to kinetic weapons. High Chancellor Vorthax, forearms moved in patterns that indicated deep concern. Ambassador, you are describing activities that could be considered acts of war against the Galactic Council. Unauthorized surveillance of military installations, intelligence gathering in restricted systems, and now the implicit threat that your species could conduct warfare more effectively than our current enemies. Sarah's response was calm but firm. Chancellor, we prefer to think of it as reconnaissance in preparation for diplomatic contact. Understanding the capabilities and limitations of potential allies is standard practice for any military organization. The fact that our activities went undetected for 3 years simply demonstrates the effectiveness of primitive technology in a galaxy that has forgotten how to defend against it. She paused, then continued with a slight smile. As for the threat assessment, we're not threatening anyone. We're offering our services as military advisors to help defend against an enemy that your current technology cannot effectively counter. The implications were staggering. A species that the Council had been mocking for its primitive technology was essentially offering to teach galactic civilization how to defend itself against an existential threat. The irony was not lost on anyone present. General Morden leaned forward, his battle-scarred form imposing even in the vast chamber. What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador? That we abandon 50 millennia of technological advancement and return to throwing rocks at our enemies? Not abandon, Sarah corrected. Supplement. Your advanced technology provides incredible advantages in terms of mobility, communication, and logistical support, but your defensive systems have a blind spot that this enemy is exploiting. We propose integrating primitive kinetic weapons into your existing military doctrine while developing countermeasures against similar attacks. Counselor Zerion's mental voice carried a note of skepticism. And what would humanity expect in return for this assistance? Surely you don't offer such valuable intelligence without expecting compensation. Sarah Chen straightened her shoulders and looked directly at the High Chancellor. We want membership in the Galactic Council, full trading rights with all member species, and recognition as a sovereign civilization capable of contributing to galactic security. In exchange, we offer complete tactical integration with galactic defense forces, full intelligence sharing regarding kinetic weapons technology, and training programs for your military personnel. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of discussions as delegates conferred among themselves in dozens of different languages and communication methods. The proposition was unprecedented. A primitive species was essentially demanding equal status in exchange for military expertise that could save galactic civilization from an unknown enemy. Admiral Kesseron's tentacles gestured toward the data display, which was still showing the destruction of the galactic fleet. Ambassador, even if we accept your analysis of the tactical situation, how do we know that humanity itself isn't somehow connected to this enemy? The timing of your contact request immediately following this devastating defeat seems suspiciously convenient. The question hung in the air like a physical presence. It was the logical concern that many delegates had been thinking, but hadn't voiced. The possibility that humanity was either working with the enemy or was perhaps the advanced scouting force for a larger invasion. Sarah Chen had clearly anticipated this question. Her response was immediate and confident. Because, Admiral, if humanity were allied with your enemy, this conversation would not be taking place. You would already be dead. The blunt statement sent a chill through the chamber. There was something in the human ambassador's tone that suggested she wasn't making a threat, but simply stating an observable fact. Our reconnaissance data includes detailed schematics of every major military installation, Defense platform and fleet deployment in galactic space, Sarah continued. We know the exact locations of your ammunition depots, fuel storage facilities, and command centers. If we were hostile, a coordinated kinetic strike could cripple galactic civilization's ability to resist in a matter of hours. She gestured toward her primitive briefcase. Instead, we're sitting here offering to help you defend against an enemy that represents a genuine threat to both our species and yours. The choice of how to respond to that offer is entirely yours. The weight of Ambassador Chen's words settled over the chamber like a gravitational field. The casual mention of humanity's ability to cripple galactic civilization within hours had transformed the entire dynamic of the meeting. What had begun as a routine evaluation of a primitive species membership application had become a negotiation between equals, with the primitive species holding most of the leverage. High Chancellor Vorthak activated his personal communication array, sending encrypted messages to military commanders throughout galactic space. Within moments, confirmation began arriving that human vessels had indeed been detected in proximity to major military installations over the past 3 years. The reports had been dismissed as sensor ghosts or navigation errors due to the impossibly primitive nature of the detected technology. Our military advisors confirm your claims, Vorthak announced, his forearms gesturing with barely controlled tension. Human vessels have been observed near 17 critical defense installations, 34 supply depots, and 47 major fleet anchorages. In every case, the contacts were dismissed as false readings because the technology signatures were deemed too primitive to represent a genuine threat, Counselor. Jektar's mechanical voice carried an edge of frustrated admiration. Your species has conducted the most comprehensive intelligence operation in galactic history, using technology that our sensors literally couldn't take seriously. It's simultaneously the most primitive and most sophisticated espionage campaign we've ever encountered. Sarah nodded acknowledgement of the compliment. Human military doctrine emphasizes the importance of understanding your operational environment before committing to any engagement. We don't possess the technological superiority to overwhelm opponents through brute force, so we rely on superior intelligence and tactical flexibility. She activated her primitive data device again, and new information appeared on the chamber's display systems. This time the screen showed detailed tactical analyses of galactic defensive positions, complete with vulnerability assessments and recommended targeting priorities. For example, Sarah continued, pointing to a 3-dimensional representation of the Council's primary defense station, your orbital platform relies on quantum shield generators that create protective barriers in 17 different dimensional phases. It's an incredibly sophisticated system that can deflect virtually any known weapon in the galactic arsenal. The display zoomed in on specific sections of the station, highlighting what appeared to be minor structural details. However, the shield generators themselves are housed in structures made of conventional matter. A kinetic projectile fired from outside, the shield perimeter could penetrate the housing and disable the entire defensive array with a single impact. General Mordun studied the tactical analysis with growing alarm. You're suggesting that our most advanced defensive installation could be neutralized by a single primitive bullet? Not suggesting, Sarah corrected. Demonstrating. The vulnerability exists because your defensive doctrine assumes that any enemy capable of reaching this position would be using advanced weapons that can be deflected by your shields. The possibility that an enemy might use primitive kinetic weapons simply wasn't considered during the design phase. Admiral Kesseran's tentacles writhed with agitation as she processed the implications. If this analysis is accurate, then every major installation in galactic space is vulnerable to the same type of attack that destroyed our fleet at Kepler 442. Every installation, every ship, and every defensive platform, Sarah confirmed. Your entire military infrastructure is optimized to counter advanced threats while remaining completely vulnerable to primitive ones. It's a systematic weakness that affects your entire civilization. The chamber fell silent as delegates contemplated the magnitude of their vulnerability. Civilizations that had considered themselves invincible found themselves facing the possibility that their technological superiority had become their greatest weakness. Counselor, Zarian's mental voice carried a note of desperate hope. You mentioned developing countermeasures. Is it possible to modify our existing defensive systems to counter kinetic attacks? Sarah smiled for the second time since entering the chamber. Absolutely. The solutions are actually quite simple once you understand the nature of the problem. Your shield generators can be recalibrated to include conventional matter deflection protocols. Your sensors can be upgraded with primitive detection algorithms. Your armor systems can be supplemented with kinetic absorption layers. She gestured toward the display, which now showed modified versions of galactic defensive systems. The irony is that defending against primitive weapons is much easier than defending against advanced ones. Kinetic projectiles follow predictable ballistic trajectories. They can't phase through multiple dimensions, and they don't carry exotic energy signatures that can overload defensive systems. High Chancellor Vorthak leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. How long would these modifications take to implement across our entire military infrastructure? With full cooperation and resource allocation, Sarah replied. Approximately 18 months for critical installations, 3 years for complete fleet integration. However, that timeline assumes that your enemy doesn't discover your defensive upgrades and adapt their tactics accordingly. The implication sent another wave of concern through the chamber. The enemy that had destroyed the galactic fleet was clearly intelligent and adaptable. If they realized that their kinetic weapons advantage was being countered, they might develop new strategies or weapon systems. General Mordun's carapace clicked thoughtfully. You speak as if you have experience fighting enemies who adapt their tactics in response to defensive improvements. Has humanity faced similar challenges? Sarah's expression grew more serious. Human military history is largely defined by technological adaptation and counter-adaptation. We've fought wars where the dominant weapons technology changed multiple times during the course of a single conflict. We understand how to maintain tactical flexibility while implementing defensive upgrades. She paused, then continued with obvious pride. More importantly, we understand how to use primitive technology as a force multiplier, rather than a limitation. While your enemy is using kinetic weapons as a brute force solution, we've developed tactics that maximize their effectiveness through precision, timing, and psychological warfare. Admiral Kesseran's tentacles stopped writhing as she focused intently on the human ambassador. Psychological warfare? How does the emotional state of an enemy affect the performance of kinetic weapons? Because, Sarah explained, kinetic weapons aren't just about the projectile itself. They're about the person firing the weapon, the tactical situation in which they're employed, and the psychological impact they have on the target. Your enemy at Kepler 442 achieved victory through technological surprise, but they fought like a conventional fleet using unconventional weapons. The display changed again, showing tactical formations and engagement patterns from the recorded battle. A human sniper with a primitive rifle could have achieved the same strategic result with 1/100th the ammunition expenditure, because we understand how to target critical personnel, vital systems, and psychological pressure points. The word sniper seemed to resonate through the chamber in ways that the universal translators couldn't quite capture. There was something about the concept that translated across species barriers, carrying implications of precision, patience, and surgical violence that made even the most advanced civilizations uncomfortable. Counselor Jektar's optical sensors focused with mechanical precision. You're describing individual warriors who use primitive weapons to eliminate specific targets with extreme precision. How effective could such tactics be against advanced military formations? Sarah Chen's smile became decidedly predatory. Would you like a demonstration? Energy through the chamber. Several delegates activated personal defensive systems while others retreated slightly in their designated sections. The idea of witnessing primitive human weapons in action within the most secure facility in galactic space was both fascinating and terrifying. High Chancellor. Vorthak raised one of his forearms in a gesture that activated the chamber's security protocols. Instantly, defensive fields shimmered into existence around the central area, and automated defense systems emerged from hidden compartments throughout the vast space. Ambassador Chen, Vorthak announced formally, any demonstration of weapons technology within this chamber must be conducted under strict security oversight. Our defensive systems are now active and configured to intercept any projectile or energy discharge that might threaten council members. Sarah nodded respectfully. I understand your precautions, Chancellor. However, I should point out that your defensive systems are designed to counter the same advanced technologies we've been discussing. They may not be as effective against primitive weapons as you expect. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew what appeared to be a small communications device. With your permission, I'd like to contact one of our vessels currently positioned in this system. The demonstration will require external support. General Mordun's battle-scarred carapace reflected the chamber's lighting as he shifted uneasily. Your ships are in this system? Our sensors show no unauthorized vessels within 50 light-years of the Council chambers. Because you're looking for the wrong technological signatures, Sarah replied as she activated her communicator. Our ships are using chemical propulsion and basic fusion reactors. Your sensors are calibrated to detect quantum drives and exotic matter signatures. To your detection systems, we're essentially invisible. The communications device crackled with static before a human voice emerged, speaking in clear but accented English. Ambassador Chen, this is Captain Rodriguez aboard the reconnaissance vessel Magellan. We're maintaining position approximately 2,000 kilometers from your location. What are your instructions? Sarah spoke into the device with professional calm. Captain, the Council has requested a demonstration of human kinetic weapons capability. Are you prepared to provide sniper support for a precision demonstration? Affirmative, Ambassador. Sergeant Martinez is already in position with a standard precision rifle. Target parameters? The casual nature of this exchange sent a chill through the chamber. The humans were discussing conducting a sniper attack against the most heavily defended facility in galactic space, as if it were a routine training exercise. Admiral Kesseran's tentacles writhed with alarm. Wait, you're suggesting that one of your soldiers could fire a kinetic weapon from 2,000 kilometers away and hit a target inside this chamber? That's impossible. The chamber is protected by 17 layers of defensive shielding, each one capable of deflecting asteroid impacts. Sarah turned to address the Admiral directly. That's exactly why this demonstration will be valuable. Your defensive systems are designed to stop massive threats, not precision strikes. A human sniper doesn't try to overwhelm your defenses. They find ways around them. She gestured toward the chamber's central display screen. For the purpose of this demonstration, we'll target that display screen. It's large enough to provide a clear target while being non-critical to chamber operations. The shot will be taken from our vessel's position through 17 layers of your best defensive technology, and will impact the screen without harming any Council members. Counselor Zerion's mental voice carried a note of disbelief. Even if your primitive weapon could somehow penetrate our defenses, the ballistic calculations required for such a shot would be impossible. The gravitational fields from nearby stars, the rotation of this facility, atmospheric interference, and the movement of your vessel would make accurate targeting impossible at that range. Impossible for automated targeting systems, Sarah agreed, but human snipers don't rely entirely on technology. They use a combination of mathematical calculation, environmental observation, and intuitive understanding of ballistic trajectories that your advanced computers can't replicate. She spoke into her communicator again. Captain, please provide targeting data to Sergeant Martinez. The target is the main display screen in the central chamber. Range approximately 2,000 kilometers. 17 defensive barrier layers. Standard atmospheric conditions. Copy that, Ambassador. Martinez reports he has visual confirmation of the target through the scope. He's requesting permission to fire when ready. The chamber fell completely silent. The idea that a primitive, human soldier could visually target an object inside the most secure facility in galactic space, from 2,000 kilometers away, defied every principle of advanced warfare that the Council members understood. High Chancellor, Vorthak's voice carried a mixture of skepticism and concern. Ambassador, our defensive systems indicate no targeting sensors focused on this facility. How is your sniper acquiring target data without using active scanning systems? Through a basic optical scope, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. Sergeant Martinez is using magnified visual targeting, atmospheric distortion calculations, and gravitational trajectory compensation, all performed manually using techniques that human snipers have perfected over centuries of warfare. Counselor Jektar's mechanical systems whirred as they processed this information. You're claiming that organic visual processing and mental calculations can achieve targeting precision that our quantum computers consider impossible? Not impossible, Sarah corrected. Just requiring a different approach than your technology-dependent systems expect. Human snipers are trained to succeed in environments where advanced technology fails or is unavailable. They represent the ultimate expression of primitive weapons technology combined with organic intelligence. She raised the communicator again. Sergeant Martinez, you are cleared to fire on my command. All council members, I recommend you observe the defensive systems monitor. You'll be able to track the projectile's path through your barriers in real time. General Morden activated his personal defensive systems, joining several other delegates who were taking precautionary measures. Ambassador, our defensive barriers have never been penetrated by a kinetic attack. The energy requirements alone should vaporize any primitive projectile long before it reaches this chamber. We'll see, Sarah replied calmly. She looked around the chamber one final time, noting the mixture of anticipation and apprehension on the faces of delegates capable of expressing such emotions. Sergeant Martinez, you may fire when ready. The response came immediately. Shot away, Ambassador. Impact in 37 seconds. The chamber's defensive systems immediately detected the incoming projectile and began tracking its progress through the barrier layers. On the central monitoring display, a small red dot appeared moving at incredible speed toward the facility. What happened next defied every principle of advanced defensive technology. The first barrier layer, designed to deflect quantum torpedoes and exotic matter weapons, didn't even register the projectile's presence. The kinetic round passed through the energy field as if it didn't exist, which from the perspective of quantum mechanics, it essentially didn't. The second layer, configured to disrupt molecular bonds and incoming threats, attempted to target the projectile but found nothing to lock onto. The simple metal bullet existed in basic spacetime without any exotic energy signatures for the defensive systems to analyze. Layers 3 through 7, each progressively more sophisticated than the last, failed to even detect the incoming round. Their sensors were calibrated for threats that manipulated reality, carried antimatter payloads, or existed across multiple dimensional planes. A basic copper-jacketed bullet traveling at 800 meters per second might as well have been invisible. Layer 8 finally registered the projectile's presence, but the defensive response was catastrophically inappropriate. Designed to counter planet-killing weapons, the barrier attempted to deploy countermeasures sufficient to stop a small moon. The energy discharge was so massive that it temporarily overloaded the facility's power grid, causing emergency lighting to activate throughout the chamber. Layers 9 through 15 suffered similar targeting failures. Each barrier was designed to counter increasingly exotic threats, and none of them had protocols for dealing with simple kinetic projectiles. The sophisticated defensive systems literally couldn't comprehend something so primitive that it didn't register on their threat assessment algorithms. Layer 16 actually managed to target the bullet correctly, but the defensive response created a localized space-time distortion that simply redirected the projectile's trajectory by a few degrees. Instead of being stopped or destroyed, the round continued toward its target with only minimal course correction required. The final barrier, Layer 17, was the most advanced defensive system in galactic space, capable of stopping weapons that could destroy solar systems. It analyzed the incoming projectile for exactly 0.03 seconds before determining that the threat level was so minimal that it didn't warrant activation. 37 seconds after Sergeant Martinez fired from a position 2,000 kilometers away, a simple rifle bullet punch, the destroyed display screen became a focal point for the chamber's collective attention, its dark surface serving as a stark reminder of how completely their assumptions about military superiority had been shattered. The small hole punched through its center seemed almost insignificant, yet it represented a fundamental shift in the galactic balance of power. High Chancellor Vorthak activated his emergency communication systems, sending priority alerts to military commanders throughout galactic space. The message was simple but urgent. All defensive installations were to implement immediate security upgrades against kinetic threats. The response time required would determine whether galactic civilization survived the next enemy encounter. Ambassador Chen, Vorthak began, his forearms moving in patterns that indicated formal acknowledgement of changed circumstances. Your demonstration has been enlightening, however. I must ask directly, are there other human vessels positioned throughout galactic space with similar capabilities? Sarah's response was immediate and unflinching. Yes, we currently have 37 reconnaissance vessels deployed across 12 sectors, each carrying precision weapons specialists and detailed intelligence on local defensive installations. Additionally, We have 14 dedicated combat vessels equipped with enhanced kinetic weapon systems specifically designed for fleet engagement. The admission sent another wave of shock through the chamber. The scope of human military deployment was far beyond what anyone had imagined possible for a supposedly primitive civilization. Counselor. Sarion's mental voice carried a note of grudging respect mixed with deep concern. You've essentially conducted a stealth invasion of galactic space. Your forces are positioned to strike critical targets throughout our territory, and our defensive systems are incapable of stopping you. Why haven't you simply conquered us outright? Because conquest wasn't our objective, Sarah replied. Humans learned long ago that ruling unwilling populations requires more resources than it's worth. We prefer cooperative partnerships with civilizations that share common interests. In this case, we share a common enemy that threatens both our species. General Morden leaned forward, his battle-scarred carapace reflecting the emergency lighting that had activated after the power grid overload. Tell us about this enemy, Ambassador. Our intelligence services know virtually nothing about them, except that they destroyed our fleet using kinetic weapons. What do you know that we don't? Sarah activated her primitive data device again, and new information appeared on the chamber's backup display systems. The data showed star charts, marking the locations of 17 different encounters between unknown vessels and various galactic installations over the past 2 years. They call themselves the Reclamation Fleet, Sarah began, her tone becoming more serious. Based on our intelligence analysis, they appear to be descendants of a civilization that was forcibly evolved beyond their kinetic weapons phase approximately 50,000 years ago. They were conquered by an alliance of advanced species and forced to abandon their primitive technology in favor of quantum-based systems. The star chart zoomed in on specific encounter locations, showing the systematic nature of the enemy's attacks. However, instead of embracing advanced technology, they secretly maintained their kinetic weapons expertise, while developing countermeasures against the quantum-based systems that had been forced upon them. They have spent 50 millennia preparing for exactly this type of warfare. Admiral Kesseran's tentacles began writhing again as she processed the implications. You're describing a civilization that was conquered by advanced technology and has spent 50,000 years planning revenge using primitive weapons. They're not just using kinetic attacks opportunistically. They're conducting a systematic campaign against quantum-based civilizations. Exactly, Sarah confirmed, and they're very good at it. Our analysis suggests they've already destroyed 17 galactic outposts, 43 exploration vessels, and at least 6 minor colony worlds. The Kepler 442 engagement was just their first major fleet action, but it won't be their last. Counselor Jektar's mechanical systems whirred with increased intensity as they processed tactical data. If they've been conducting this campaign for 2 years, why haven't our intelligence services detected the pattern? Because, Sarah explained, your intelligence services were looking for advanced threats using advanced detection methods. The Reclamation Fleet uses primitive stealth technology, basic communication systems, and kinetic weapons that don't register on your quantum-based sensor networks. To your intelligence apparatus, they're essentially invisible. She gestured toward the data display, which now showed projected attack patterns based on the enemy's previous activities. However, human intelligence services have been tracking them since their first attack. We've identified their base of operations, analyzed their tactical doctrine, and developed countermeasures for their weapon systems. High Chancellor Vorthak's forearms moved in complex patterns as he processed this information. You're offering to share intelligence about an enemy that we didn't even know existed until now. What assurance do we have that this isn't simply an elaborate deception designed to gain our trust? Sarah Chen stood slowly, her expression growing more serious than it had been throughout the entire session. Because, Chancellor, in approximately 6 hours, the Reclamation Fleet is going to attack this facility. The statement hit the chamber like a physical blow. Emergency alarms began sounding throughout the facility as automated systems detected the elevated stress levels of multiple species simultaneously, experiencing extreme anxiety. Our reconnaissance vessels detected the enemy fleet entering this system 47 minutes ago, Sarah continued, her voice cutting through the growing chaos. They're using a slow approach trajectory that will bring them into optimal firing position at exactly the time I specified. Their target is the Galactic Council itself. General Mordoon's carapace plates clattered together as he activated his personal communication systems. All defense fleets, this is General Morden. Implement immediate defensive posture around the Council facility. Unknown enemy forces are approaching this system. The response came back within seconds, and the general's expression showed confusion mixed with alarm. Ambassador, our sensor networks show no approaching enemy vessels. Long-range scans detect no quantum signatures, exotic matter traces, or dimensional disturbances consistent with an incoming fleet. Because they're not using quantum drives or exotic matter propulsion, Sarah replied patiently. They're using chemical rockets and basic fusion drives, just like our ships. Your sensors can't detect them because you're not looking for primitive technology signatures. Admiral Kesseran's tentacles writhed frantically as she accessed her own fleet communication systems. If what you're saying is true, then our entire defensive fleet is useless. We can't fight an enemy we can't detect using weapons that can't be stopped by our defensive systems. That's correct, Sarah confirmed. Unless you're willing to accept human assistance, this facility will be destroyed along with every member of the Galactic Council. The Reclamation Fleet doesn't take prisoners, and they don't negotiate with quantum-based civilizations. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alarm calls, emergency communications, and frantic discussions in dozens of different languages. The realization that they were facing imminent destruction by an enemy they couldn't see using weapons they couldn't stop had shattered the remaining composure of even the most advanced civilizations. Hi. Chancellor Vorthak raised all four arms in a gesture that activated the chamber's maximum priority alert systems. Ambassador Chen, if you possess the capability to defend this facility against the approaching enemy, I hereby authorize whatever cooperation you require. Consider this formal acceptance of humanity's membership application to the Galactic Council. Sarah smiled grimly as she activated her communicator. Thank you, Chancellor. Captain Rodriguez, please implement Defensive Protocol 7. All human vessels in this system are to engage the Reclamation Fleet using standard kinetic warfare doctrine. The response was immediate and confident. Copy that, Ambassador. All vessels report ready for engagement. Estimated time to enemy intercept, 5 hours, 37 minutes. We'll stop them before they reach the Council facility. As alarms continued to sound throughout the chamber, Ambassador Chen looked around at the assembled representatives of 47 advanced civilizations, all of whom were now depending on primitive human technology for their survival. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, she announced formally, welcome to the future of galactic warfare. An improvised command center. Representatives from 47 civilizations watched in fascination and growing amazement as primitive human technology engaged in the most critical battle in galactic history. The irony was not lost on anyone present that their survival depended entirely on the weapons they had been mocking earlier that day. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the communication system with professional calm. Ambassador Chen, we have visual contact with the Reclamation Fleet, confirming 43 enemy vessels using kinetic weapon systems and primitive stealth technology. They appear to be configured for orbital bombardment of the Council facility. Sarah stood at the center of the chamber, coordinating the defense through her simple communication device, while galactic military commanders watched helplessly from the sidelines. Their advanced fleets remained at maximum range, unable to detect the enemy or contribute meaningfully to the engagement. Understood, Captain. Are our vessels in position for coordinated engagement? Affirmative. All 14 combat vessels report optimal firing positions. Reconnaissance ships have provided detailed targeting data for enemy command vessels and weapons platforms. We're ready to demonstrate proper kinetic warfare doctrine to our new allies. The chamber's backup display systems showed the engagement from multiple human sensor perspectives. Unlike the previous recording from Kepler 442, this battle would demonstrate human tactical superiority rather than mere technological effectiveness. General Morden watched the tactical display with growing amazement. Their formation is completely different from standard galactic fleet doctrine. The human ships are maintaining enormous distances between vessels while remaining in coordinated firing positions. Admiral Kesseran's tentacles gestured toward specific aspects of the human formation. They're not trying to concentrate firepower or create overlapping defensive fields. Each ship appears to be operating independently, while supporting a unified tactical objective. Because, Sarah explained without taking her attention from the communication device. Kinetic weapons don't require massed firepower to be effective. A single precise shot can disable or destroy a target regardless of how many ships are firing. Human doctrine emphasizes individual marksmanship and tactical flexibility over concentrated firepower. The engagement began with characteristic human precision, instead of the overwhelming salvos that had characterized galactic warfare for millennia. The human fleet opened fire with carefully targeted single shots. Each round was aimed at specific critical systems on enemy vessels, rather than attempting to achieve general destruction through overwhelming force. First target down, reported Captain Rodriguez. Enemy command vessel disabled with a precision strike to their main communications array. They're unable to coordinate fleet movements. Within minutes, the tactical situation became clear. The reclamation fleet, which had achieved devastating success against galactic forces through technological surprise, found themselves facing an enemy that understood kinetic warfare better than they did. Human ships systematically disabled enemy vessels by targeting critical systems, communication arrays, and weapons platforms with surgical precision. Counselor Zarion's mental voice carried a note of amazed admiration. They're not trying to destroy the enemy ships. They're systematically disabling them while minimizing ammunition expenditure and avoiding unnecessary casualties. Human military doctrine emphasizes tactical efficiency, Sarah replied. Destroying an enemy vessel requires significantly more ammunition than disabling it. Additionally, disabled vessels can provide intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions. The battle continued with human vessels demonstrating tactical capabilities that the reclamation fleet clearly hadn't expected. Instead of engaging in direct confrontation, human ships used their superior knowledge of kinetic ballistics to fire from positions where return fire was impossible or ineffective. Enemy flagship disabled, Captain Rodriguez reported. Precision strike to their main reactor cooling system. The vessel is intact but completely without power. Recommend boarding action to secure intelligence materials. Negative, Captain. Continue systematic disabling of enemy vessels. We want prisoners for interrogation, not casualties for propaganda. High Chancellor Vorthak watched the engagement with forearms moving in patterns that indicated profound respect. Ambassador, your fleet is achieving complete tactical superiority against an enemy that destroyed our most advanced forces. How is this level of precision possible? Sarah finally turned away from her communication device to address the chamber directly. Because every human ship in this engagement is crewed by specialists who have trained their entire lives to use kinetic weapons effectively. Our captains are not simply pilots. They're marksmen who understand ballistics, trajectory calculation, and precision targeting at an intuitive level. The tactical display showed human vessels executing maneuvers that defied conventional understanding of fleet combat. Ships fired at targets while moving at high velocity, compensated for gravitational interference from multiple sources, and achieved hit rates that approached 100% despite ranges that should have made accurate targeting impossible. Most importantly, Sarah continued, every human crew understands that kinetic weapons are not about technological superiority. They're about skill, training, and tactical intelligence. The reclamation fleet uses kinetic weapons as a brute force solution to overcome advanced defenses. We use them as precision instruments to achieve specific tactical objectives. Admiral Kesseran's tentacles writhed with excitement as she observed the human tactical doctrine in action. They're treating each shot like a surgical operation. Every round is aimed at a specific target with a specific purpose, and every hit achieves exactly the intended result. Last enemy vessel disabled, Captain Rodriguez announced. Total ammunition expenditure, 137 rounds. Enemy casualties minimal. Enemy fleet completely neutralized and ready for salvage operations. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. 43 enemy vessels, representing the same force that had destroyed an entire galactic fleet, had been systematically disabled by 14 human ships, using less ammunition than a single galactic dreadnought would expend in a routine training exercise. Counselor, Jektar's mechanical voice carried a note of profound respect. Ambassador Chen, your species has just demonstrated tactical capabilities that exceed anything in recorded galactic history. You've achieved complete victory against a superior enemy force while minimizing casualties and ammunition expenditure. Sarah nodded acknowledgement. of the compliment while maintaining her professional demeanor. Human military doctrine has been refined through centuries of warfare against opponents with varying technological capabilities. We've learned that superior tactics and training can overcome almost any technological disadvantage. She gestured toward the tactical display, which now showed human vessels beginning salvage and prisoner recovery operations. More importantly, we've demonstrated that the reclamation fleet can be defeated using appropriate tactics and weapon systems. With proper training and equipment modifications, Galactic military forces will be able to defend against similar attacks. High Chancellor Vorthak stood slowly, his forearms moving in the most formal gesture of respect that his species possessed. Ambassador Chen, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally welcome humanity as a full-member civilization with complete voting rights and military alliance status. Your species has proven that advancement cannot be measured solely by technological sophistication. The chamber erupted in what could only be described as applause, though the sound varied dramatically across 47 different species. Representatives who had been mocking human primitiveness hours earlier now stood to show respect for the species that had just saved their lives. Sarah Chen smiled as she looked around the chamber, noting the dramatic change in attitude from every delegate present. Thank you, Chancellor. Humanity looks forward to our partnership with Galactic civilization. We believe that combining our tactical expertise with your technological capabilities will create a military alliance capable of defending against any threat. She paused, then continued with a slight grin. And perhaps now you understand why we weren't particularly concerned about impressing you with our technology. Sometimes the most primitive solution is also the most effective one. General Mordun's carapace clicked with what his species used to indicate amusement. Ambassador, I believe we owe your Sergeant Martinez a formal commendation. His demonstration shot through our defensive barriers will be studied in military academies throughout galactic space. I'll pass along your compliments, Sarah replied, though I should mention that Sergeant Martinez considers this engagement routine training. By human standards, hitting a stationary target at 2,000 kilometers through energy barriers is considered basic marksmanship. The statement sent one final wave of amazed disbelief through the chamber. The realization that what had seemed impossible to galactic civilization was considered routine by human military standards suggested that they had only seen the beginning of humanity's tactical capabilities as emergency systems throughout the facility began powering down.